Commander Jake Morrison had been in Afghanistan long enough to know when something felt wrong. 20 years in naval special warfare had given him instincts that screamed louder than any radio chatter, and right now, every nerve in his body was firing warning signals. The observation post was nothing more than a shallow depression carved into the rocky mountainside, camouflaged with netting and local vegetation. Morrison lay prone behind his spotting scope, the morning sun already turning the position into an oven despite the October chill in the air. Below him, the Kunar Valley stretched out like a jagged scar across the Afghan landscape, all browns and grays, punctuated by the occasional green of a village or poppy field. His team had been in position since 300 hours, watching, waiting. Intelligence suggested that Khalid Ghazi, a high-value Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks across 3 provinces, would be moving through the valley today. The information had come from a usually reliable source, a local informant who'd been feeding them solid intelligence for 6 months. Morrison's orders were simple: locate, identify, and eliminate. "Commander, we've got movement," whispered Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Chen, his spotter, who crouched beside him with a range finder and tablet displaying real-time satellite imagery. Morrison adjusted his scope, scanning the rough dirt road that snaked through the valley floor, approximately 2 miles away. A convoy of 3 vehicles appeared, moving slowly through the rocky terrain. 2 Toyota Hilux trucks, common as dirt in this part of the world, flanked a newer Land Cruiser. The configuration matched their intelligence reports. "Distance?" Morrison asked, his voice barely audible. 3,800 meters and closing, Chen replied, his fingers dancing across the tablet. "Wind is, hell, it's shifting. Currently 3.2 meters per second, northeast to southwest, but gusting." Morrison's mind automatically began calculating the shot. At that range, even with his team's .338 Lapua Magnum rifles, they'd need perfect conditions. Temperature, humidity, air pressure, the Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation, every variable mattered. He'd made shots at extreme range before, but nothing was ever guaranteed at distances exceeding 2 miles. "We wait until they're within 3,200 meters, Morrison decided. "The terrain will force them to slow down at the checkpoint. That's our window." The convoy continued its slow approach. Morrison could feel his heart rate steady, entering that zone where time seemed to slow down, and the world narrowed to nothing but the target and the trigger. His finger rested beside the trigger guard, not on it, never on it until the decision was made. Then everything changed. The sound arrived first, a sharp, distinctive crack that echoed across the valley, the unmistakable report of a high-powered rifle. But it came from the wrong direction. Morrison's head snapped up, his tactical mind immediately trying to triangulate the source. The sound had originated from his 9 o'clock position, from an adjacent ridge approximately 3,000 meters away. Through his scope, Morrison watched the impossible unfold in slow motion. The Land Cruiser's rear passenger door had just opened. A man emerged, tall, bearded, wearing the distinct white turban and dark vest that matched Khalid Ghazi's description perfectly. He was surrounded by 4 bodyguards, each scanning the surrounding ridges with practiced paranoia. The man took 2 steps away from the vehicle. Then his head snapped back violently, and he collapsed. "Jesus Christ," Chen gasped, "did you see that?" Morrison's hands were frozen on his rifle. His brain struggled to process what he'd just witnessed. The mathematics alone were staggering. Whoever had made that shot had engaged a target at a distance exceeding 3,200 meters, over 2 miles. They'd hit a moving target, or rather, a target that had just emerged from a vehicle and had been stationary for perhaps 2 seconds. The bodyguards erupted into chaos, dragging their commander's body while scanning the ridges. 2 of them fired wildly toward the wrong mountains, their AK-47s barking uselessly at shadows. The convoy began to scatter, engines roaring as they attempted tactical retreats in 3 different directions. But Morrison wasn't watching the valley anymore. His scope had swung toward the adjacent ridge, toward the source of that impossible shot. The morning sun glinted off something, just a flash there and gone, from a position he would have sworn was unoccupied. His team had conducted surveillance of the entire area. There were no coalition forces positioned on that ridge. No allied units. Nothing. "Chen, get on comms right now," Morrison ordered, his voice tight. "Find out what units are operating in our sector. I want to know who the hell is on that ridge." While Chen worked the radio, Morrison continued to observe. Through his high-powered scope, he could just barely make out the distant position. It was a textbook sniper's nest, elevated with natural rock cover, multiple egress routes. Professional, deliberate. Someone had planned this. "Commander, I've got nothing," Chen reported, his voice edged with confusion. "TOC confirms we're the only unit in this grid square. They're asking if we took the shot." "Negative," Morrison replied, still scanning. Tell them we have an unknown element in play. Possible friendly fire situation, but the shot definitely didn't come from coalition positions we're aware of." His mind raced through possibilities. A CIA asset operating off the books, Special Activities Division running a parallel operation, a foreign Special Forces unit, British SAS, maybe, or German KSK, but none of it made sense. Those units didn't operate without coordination, not in a theater as tightly controlled as Afghanistan had become. Then a darker thought crept in. What if it wasn't friendly at all? "We're moving," Morrison announced suddenly. "Pack it up, we're checking out that position." "Sir," Chen looked uncertain. "Our orders were to—" "Our orders just became irrelevant when someone made an impossible shot from a position that shouldn't exist," Morrison cut him off. "Someone is out there with capabilities that match or exceed our own, and I need to know who they are and why we weren't briefed. Move." As his team began breaking down their equipment with practiced efficiency, Morrison took one last look at the valley below. Khalid Ghazi's body lay motionless in the dirt, his life ended by a bullet that had traveled nearly 2 miles through shifting wind and thin mountain air. Whoever pulled that trigger wasn't just skilled. They were operating at a level Morrison had only seen a handful of times in his entire career. The question that burned in his mind wasn't just who had made the shot. It was why. And as the echo of that rifle shot finally faded into the mountains, Commander Jake Morrison felt something he rarely experienced in 20 years of warfare, genuine unease. Because somewhere out there in those unforgiving Afghan peaks was a ghost, a phantom sniper with world-class skills and unknown intentions. And Morrison intended to find them. The climb to the adjacent ridge took 47 minutes of hard tactical movement. Morrison's 6-man team moved in a staggered formation, weapons up, every sense on high alert. The terrain was brutal, loose shale that threatened to give way with every step, jagged outcroppings that forced them to navigate narrow passages, and the ever-present threat of enemy forces that could be watching from 1,000 different positions. Morrison's lungs burned in the thin mountain air, but he pushed forward, driven by a gnawing need to understand what had just happened. In 2 decades of special operations, he'd learned to trust his instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with this situation. 50 meters, whispered Petty Officer Chen, checking his GPS. "Position should be just over that rock formation." Morrison raised his fist, signaling the team to halt. They took up defensive positions, forming a perimeter. Morrison hand-signaled for Chen and Lieutenant Davis to move forward with him while the others maintained security. Every movement was deliberate, controlled. If the shooter was still there, if this was a trap, they needed to be ready. They crested the final rise, weapons trained on the sniper position. "Empty." Morrison's eyes swept across the nest, his tactical mind automatically cataloging every detail. The position was sophisticated, clearly prepared well in advance, not a hasty setup. Someone had arranged rocks to create a natural blind, providing cover while offering an unobstructed view of the valley below. A shallow depression had been carved into the dirt, just deep enough for a shooter to lie prone comfortably. Small stones had been carefully arranged to prop equipment at the perfect angles. "Clear," Davis called out after checking the immediate area. "Whoever was here is long gone." Morrison approached the position slowly, crouching down to examine it more closely. His trained eye caught details that told a story. The dirt showed the clear imprint of a body. Someone had lain here for hours, maybe longer. The depression in the soil suggested extended surveillance, patient waiting. This wasn't a rush job or an opportunistic shot. This was planned, methodical, professional. Then he saw the brass casing. It lay precisely where it should have been ejected, glinting in the afternoon sun. Morrison pulled a glove from his pocket and carefully picked it up, turning it over in his fingers. .338 Lapua Magnum, match-grade ammunition. The same caliber his own team used. He examined the head stamp, custom manufactured, not military issue. Someone had hand-loaded this round, carefully preparing it for maximum accuracy. "Commander, you need to see this," Chen called from a few feet away. Morrison moved to where his spotter was crouched, examining something in the dirt. Boot prints, clear impressions in the soft soil near the position. Morrison knelt down, studying them with growing confusion. The prints were small, very small. "Size 7, maybe 8, Chen observed, echoing Morrison's thoughts. "That's unusual for an operator." Morrison traced the outline with his finger. The tread pattern was distinctive, Salomon Quest boots, a favorite among special operations personnel for mountain work. But the size was undeniable. These weren't the prints of a typical male soldier. The stride length confirmed it, shorter, more compact than what he'd expect from someone his size or Chen's. "Could be a foreign operative," Davis suggested, though his voice carried uncertainty. "Some international special forces units are less size-restrictive than we are." Morrison didn't respond. His mind was already spinning through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. He stood, following the boot prints as they led away from the position. The shooter had moved northwest, descending the ridge via a different route than the one Morrison's team had used. Smart, professional, always have multiple exit strategies. As he tracked the prints, something else caught his eye: scratches on a nearby rock face. Morrison moved closer, his pulse quickening. Someone had carved something into the stone, using what looked like a knife or the edge of a climbing tool. The marks were fresh, the exposed rock still slightly lighter than the weathered surface around it. He read the inscription, 9722, never forget. The date hit Morrison like a physical blow. September 7, 2022. He knew that date. Every operator in theater knew that date. It had been one of the worst days of the war's final year. A Marine reconnaissance unit had been ambushed in this very province. 12 Marines dead in a coordinated attack that intelligence had failed to predict or prevent. The lone survivor had been. Morrison's mind raced, trying to recall the details. The incident had been classified, buried under layers of operational security. There had been an investigation, accusations of intelligence failures, and then silence. The survivor had been a female Marine, one of the Corps' rare female scout snipers. Her name had been redacted from most reports, but Morrison remembered whispers, rumors of a court-martial or forced discharge. "Boss, we've got a problem," called out Sergeant Williams, one of the team's rear security. He was examining something on the opposite side of the position. Morrison moved to Williams' location and felt his blood run cold. Scratched into the dirt, protected under an overhang that had kept it from being blown away, was a simple diagram. A map, crude but accurate, showing the valley below, the road, and precise range calculations. The numbers were meticulous: wind speed variations, temperature gradients, elevation differences, even calculations for the Coriolis effect. But what made Morrison's stomach drop was the notation at the bottom: 3,247 meters, 1 shot, 1 kill, For my brothers. This was personal, Chen said quietly, reading over Morrison's shoulder. Whoever made this shot wasn't following orders. They were settling a score. Morrison stood, his mind racing. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture that made no sense and perfect sense at the same time. A lone operator, likely female based on the boot size. Expert-level sniper skills. A personal vendetta connected to the September 7th massacre, operating completely off the books with no official sanction or support. "Sir, what do we do?" Davis asked. "Do we report this?" Morrison looked back down at the valley where Khalid Ghazi's body still lay. The Taliban commander had been responsible for coordinating attacks across the province. Intelligence had linked him to at least 15 coalition deaths, including the September 7th ambush. "Collect all the evidence," Morrison ordered, his voice carefully neutral. "Every brass casing, photograph everything, document the entire position. I want a complete report." "Are we pursuing?" Chen asked. Morrison looked at the boot prints leading away into the mountains, disappearing into the vast Afghan wilderness. Whoever had made that shot had a significant head start. They knew this terrain, had planned their exfiltration carefully. Following them would be like chasing a ghost through a labyrinth. But more than that, Morrison was starting to understand what he was really dealing with. This wasn't a foreign operative or a rogue CIA asset. This was something far more complicated, a soldier seeking justice outside the system, operating in the shadows because the official channels had failed them. "We follow protocol," Morrison said finally. "Document everything, report to command, and let them make the call." But even as he said the words, Morrison knew he was lying. He wasn't going to just report this and walk away. He needed to know who this shooter was. He needed to understand why a trained sniper had gone rogue, why they'd risked everything for one shot, and what had happened on September 7th, 2022, that had driven someone to this desperate act of vengeance. As the team worked to document the position, Morrison stood at the edge of the ridge, looking out across the valley. Somewhere out there was a ghost with a rifle, a soldier who'd been pushed beyond the breaking point. And Commander Jake Morrison intended to find them before anyone else did. Because something told him that when he finally uncovered the truth, it would be far more dangerous than any enemy combatant he'd ever faced. The operations center at Forward Operating Base Sharana was a converted shipping container packed with computers, monitors, and exhausted intelligence analysts. Morrison stormed through the door at 1600 hours, still covered in dust from the ridge, his face set in a hard line that made junior personnel step out of his way. "Where's Patterson?" Morrison demanded, his voice cutting through the low hum of conversations and keyboard clicks. A nervous-looking specialist pointed toward a back office. "He's in a classified briefing, sir," he said not to. Morrison was already moving, pushing past the specialist and throwing open the office door without knocking. Captain Derek Patterson, the FOB's senior intelligence officer, looked up from a secure laptop, his face flashing irritation that quickly shifted to concern when he saw Morrison's expression. "Commander, I'm in the middle of. We need to talk. Now." Morrison closed the door behind him and locked it. "And before you tell me to follow the chain of command or file a report, you need to understand that I just witnessed a shot that should be impossible, made by an operator who shouldn't exist, from a position we had no intel on." Patterson's face paled slightly. He closed his laptop with deliberate care. "What exactly are you talking about?" Morrison dropped the evidence bag containing the brass casing onto Patterson's desk. "Someone killed Khalid Ghazi this morning with a 3,247-meter shot. Not us. Not any coalition unit we're aware of. I found this at the shooting position, along with a message carved into stone. September 7th, 2022, never forget." The color drained completely from Patterson's face. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up the evidence bag, examining the casing through the plastic. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at the brass as if it were a live grenade. "Jesus Christ," Patterson whispered finally. "She's here, she's actually here." "Who?" Morrison leaned forward, his palms flat on the desk. "Who is she, Captain? And why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" Patterson stood abruptly, moving to the door to ensure it was locked. He pulled the blinds on the small window, blocking the view from the operations center. When he turned back to Morrison, his face was ashen. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at a level that could end both our careers," Patterson said quietly. "The September 7th incident wasn't what the official reports claimed. It was a massacre, yes, but it wasn't an intelligence failure." Morrison felt his stomach tighten. "Explain." Patterson pulled up a file on his laptop, his fingers shaking slightly as he typed in multiple passwords. The screen filled with redacted documents, incident reports with more black bars than visible text, and a series of photographs that made Morrison's jaw clench. 12 Marines died that day, Patterson began, his voice hollow. 1st Platoon, Bravo Company, 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion. They were conducting a routine patrol based on intelligence that suggested the area was clear of enemy activity. The intelligence was wrong, or rather, it was deliberately falsified. Falsified? Morrison's voice was dangerous. By who? "That's the question that got people fired, transferred, and buried under non-disclosure agreements," Patterson said. He pulled up a personnel file. A photograph appeared. A young woman in Marine Corps dress blues, her face serious, her eyes intense. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen, USMC Scout Sniper. She was the 13th member of that patrol, the only survivor. Morrison studied the photograph. She looked young, maybe 27 or 28 in the photo. Small frame, but he could see the hardness in her eyes, the kind of thousand-yard stare that only came from seeing too much combat. Chen survived because she was on overwatch, positioned 800 meters from the patrol route, Patterson continued. She watched through her scope as her entire unit walked into a carefully planned ambush. Taliban fighters in prepared positions, interlocking fields of fire, the whole kill zone perfectly designed. She killed 7 insurgents before her position was compromised, and she had to extract under fire. "Why was she blamed?" Morrison asked, though pieces were already falling into place in his mind. Patterson pulled up another document, an after-action report. Because someone needed a scapegoat. The intelligence that sent that patrol into the kill zone came from a source that was supposed to be reliable. When it turned out to be catastrophically wrong, questions started being asked. How did the Taliban know exactly where our patrol would be? Why was the ambush so perfectly positioned? The investigation started pointing toward deliberate compromise of the operation. "Someone sold them out," Morrison said flatly. That's what Chen claimed. She said the intelligence was planted, that someone in the command structure had deliberately fed false information to set up her unit. She had evidence, intercepted communications, analysis of the attack pattern, even financial transactions that suggested payoffs. Patterson's face twisted with disgust. She presented everything to her chain of command. And they buried her instead of investigating. Worse, they court-martialed her for dereliction of duty, claiming she abandoned her post during the firefight. The evidence she'd collected mysteriously disappeared from the system. Her service record was flagged, her security clearance revoked. 3 senior officers testified against her, saying she was unstable, paranoid, making wild accusations without proof. Morrison felt rage building in his chest, so they destroyed her to protect themselves. The court-martial didn't stick. There were too many holes in the prosecution's case, but they gave her a general discharge under other than honorable conditions, effectively ending her career and destroying her credibility. She disappeared after that. The official word was she'd returned to civilian life. Patterson looked at the brass casing again. Clearly, that wasn't the whole story. "Who were the officers?" Morrison demanded. "Who testified against her?" Patterson hesitated, his finger hovering over the keyboard. "Commander, if I show you this, there's no going back. These are people with serious pull, careers that span decades, connections that go all the way to—" "I don't care if they're connected to God himself," Morrison interrupted. "Who were they?" Patterson pulled up 3 files. Morrison memorized each face, each name. Colonel Marcus Hendricks, now stationed at CENTCOM headquarters in Tampa. Lieutenant Colonel James Vickers, currently assigned to the Pentagon. And Major Sarah Blackwood, serving as a liaison officer with the CIA. "Khalid Ghazi," Morrison said slowly. "Was he involved in the September 7th ambush?" Patterson nodded grimly. He coordinated it. Intercepted communications confirmed he was the tactical commander who planned the operation. Chen would have known that. She would have had access to the same intelligence we did. The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. Sarah Chen hadn't disappeared into civilian life. She'd gone underground, spent 3 years hunting the man who'd killed her unit, and today she'd finally gotten her revenge with one impossibly perfect shot. "Where is she now?" Patterson asked. Morrison thought about the boot prints leading into the mountains, the carefully planned exfiltration route, the professional precision of the entire operation. Sarah Chen was a trained scout sniper operating in familiar terrain, with nothing left to lose and a 3-year head start on disappearing. "I don't know," Morrison said honestly, "but I'm going to find her." "Why to arrest her?" Morrison looked at the photograph of Sarah Chen again, at the faces of the 12 Marines who died on September 7th, at the names of the officers who'd betrayed them all. "No," he said quietly, "to find out the truth, all of it." Because Commander Jake Morrison was beginning to realize that the real enemy wasn't the ghost in the mountains. It was the corruption that had created her. Morrison gave himself 48 hours. That's how long he estimated before higher command would start demanding detailed reports, asking questions he wasn't ready to answer, and potentially launching an official manhunt for Sarah Chen. 48 hours to find her first, to understand what really happened, and to decide what the hell he was going to do about it. He started where all good investigations begin, with people who talk when they shouldn't. The Black Cat Bar in Kabul was exactly the kind of place where information flowed more freely than the watered-down whiskey. Morrison sat in a back corner booth at 2200 hours, watching the crowd of contractors, interpreters, and off-duty soldiers swap stories and lies in equal measure. He was waiting for a man named David Torres, a former Army intelligence analyst who now worked as a private contractor doing consultation work that everyone knew meant selling information to the highest bidder. Torres slid into the booth at 22:15, his eyes scanning the room with practiced paranoia before settling on Morrison. "Commander," Torres said, his voice carefully neutral, "didn't expect to hear from you. Thought SEALs were above drinking with the help these days." "I need information, Torres, and I need it to stay quiet." Torres grinned, showing teeth yellowed from too many cigarettes. "Information costs money, my friend. Quiet information costs more." Morrison slid an envelope across the table. $5,000 cash, his own money, drawn from an account he kept for situations exactly like this. Torres peeked inside and his grin widened. "What do you want to know?" "Sarah Chen, former Marine Scout sniper. I need everything, where she's been, who she's talked to, how she survived for 3 years off the grid." The grin disappeared from Torres' face. He pushed the envelope back across the table. "Keep your money, Commander. I don't mess with ghosts, and that woman is as ghost as they come." "You know something." "I know enough to stay the hell away." Torres started to stand, but Morrison's hand shot out, gripping his wrist. 5,000 now. Another 10 when you deliver. And Torres, this is happening whether you help me or not. The question is whether you want to be useful or just another obstacle. Torres sat back down slowly, sweat beading on his forehead despite the bar's air conditioning. He took a long drink of his whiskey, then leaned forward. "Chen's been operating under at least 4 different identities that I know of," Torres said quietly. "She's got a network of former Marines who believe her story, contractors who owe her favors, even a couple of agency guys who think she got screwed. She moves between safe houses, never stays in one place more than a few days. Smart, careful, professional. How's she funding this operation?" That's where it gets interesting. Torres pulled out his phone, showing Morrison a series of photographs, financial documents, transaction records, account numbers. Someone's been feeding her money, a lot of money. Offshore accounts, cryptocurrency transfers, cash drops. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars over 3 years. Morrison studied the documents, his tactical mind analyzing patterns. Who's the source? Can't trace it. Whoever's backing her knows how to hide money better than most intelligence agencies. But here's the thing. The timing of the transfers coincides with movements of certain high-ranking officers. Hendricks, Vickers, Blackwood, almost like someone's been tracking them, watching them. She's been building a case, Morrison realized. All this time, she hasn't just been hunting Ghazi. She's been gathering evidence against the people who betrayed her unit. Torres nodded. And here's something else. 3 weeks ago, Chen was spotted in Jalalabad. My sources say she met with a journalist, Emma Rodriguez, works for The Guardian, does investigative pieces on military corruption. They talked for 2 hours in a coffee shop, and Chen handed over a package. Morrison's pulse quickened. What was in the package? Don't know. But Rodriguez left Afghanistan the next day, flew straight to London. Whatever Chen gave her, it was important enough to run with immediately. The pieces were forming a bigger picture. Sarah Chen wasn't just a soldier seeking revenge. She was building a case, collecting evidence, preparing to expose the truth. The kill shot on Ghazi wasn't the end of her mission. It was just the beginning. "Where is she now?" Morrison asked. Torres hesitated, genuine fear flickering in his eyes. "Commander, if I tell you this, we're square. You never heard it from me, and we never had this conversation." "Agreed." "There's a safe house in Jalalabad near the Kabul River. Second-floor apartment building with a green door, 3 blocks west of the old munitions factory. My source saw someone matching her description there 2 days ago. But Morrison," Torres grabbed his arm. "She's not alone. There are at least 3 people with her, all ex-military, all loyal. You go in there guns blazing, you're starting a war you might not win." Morrison stood, pocketing the photographs. He dropped the envelope on the table. "You've earned this. Get yourself somewhere safe, Torres. When this breaks, you don't want to be anywhere near it." He left the bar and made his way through Kabul's nighttime streets, his mind racing. Sarah Chen was in Jalalabad, approximately 2 hours away. She had evidence that could bring down senior officers, possibly expose a conspiracy that had gotten 12 Marines killed. And she just eliminated the Taliban commander who'd orchestrated the ambush, effectively completing her personal mission of vengeance. The question was, what would she do next? Morrison pulled out his encrypted phone and made a call. Chen answered on the second ring, one of his most trusted operators, a chief petty officer who'd served with him for 8 years. "I need the team ready to move in 2 hours, Morrison said. "Full kit, but this is not a combat operation. We're making contact with a potentially hostile operator, and I want it to end with conversation, not bullets." "Understood, sir. Destination?" "Jalalabad. And Chief, whatever happens in the next 24 hours, I need you to trust me. We're going off book on this one." There was a pause. "Sir, going off book is how careers end." "Sometimes ending a career is preferable to living with what happens if you don't," Morrison replied. He hung up and stared at the Kabul skyline, the city lights twinkling against the dark mountains beyond. Somewhere in those mountains, Sarah Chen had made an impossible shot, had killed a man who deserved to die, and had set in motion events that Morrison suspected would shake the military establishment to its core. In 45 hours, command would start asking questions. In 45 hours, the official machinery would grind into motion, and Sarah Chen would become a target for every military police unit and intelligence agency in theater. Morrison had 45 hours to find her first. And when he did, he would have to make the hardest decision of his career: follow orders and bring her in, or help a rogue operator expose a truth that powerful people had killed to keep buried. The drive to Jalalabad would take 2 hours. Morrison had 2 hours to decide which kind of man he really was. He climbed into his vehicle and started the engine, heading east into the night, chasing a ghost who might be the only honest soldier left in this damned war. The drive to Jalalabad was tense and silent. Morrison's team of 4 operators sat in the armored SUV, weapons ready but safeties on. They all knew this wasn't a standard operation. The commander had given them minimal briefing: locate and establish contact with a rogue operator, use of force only as last resort. The lack of details spoke volumes. This was personal and it was off the books. Jalalabad appeared on the horizon as dawn broke, the city bathed in the orange glow of sunrise. Morrison had been awake for 36 hours straight, but adrenaline kept his mind sharp. He'd spent the drive analyzing every angle, every possible outcome of the confrontation ahead. "Sir, we're 10 minutes out," Chief Petty Officer Ramirez said from the driver's seat. "What's the play when we arrive?" Morrison checked his sidearm, a habit more than necessity. "We establish a perimeter, but we don't breach. I go in alone, unarmed. If shooting starts, extract me and fall back. No heroes, no firefights in civilian areas. Understood?" "You're going in unarmed?" Lieutenant Davis questioned from the back seat. "Sir, with all due respect, that's..." "An order," Morrison cut him off. "This operator isn't our enemy, not yet, and I'm not going to start a gunfight that could end with good people dead on both sides." The safe house was exactly where Torres said it would be: a weathered 2-story building with a faded green door, sandwiched between a fabric shop and an abandoned restaurant. The neighborhood was quiet at this early hour, only a few merchants beginning to open their stalls in the pre-dawn darkness. Morrison's team took up positions with practiced efficiency. Ramirez and Davis covered the rear exit, while 2 other operators, Martinez and Kim, established overwatch from a rooftop across the street. Morrison adjusted his radio earpiece and walked toward the green door, his hands deliberately visible and empty. The door was unlocked. That was the first surprise. Morrison pushed it open slowly, every nerve on high alert. The stairwell was dark, narrow, smelling of cooking spices and dust. He climbed the stairs, each step deliberate, listening for any sound of movement above. When he reached the 2nd floor, he found another door, this one slightly ajar. A voice came from inside, calm and controlled. "Commander Morrison, I wondered when you'd find me. Come in slowly, hands where I can see them." Morrison pushed the door open and stepped into a sparse apartment. The room was mostly empty: a small table, 2 chairs, a sleeping mat in the corner. Maps covered one wall, connected by red string in patterns that suggested months of intelligence work. But Morrison's attention fixed on the woman standing by the window. Sarah Chen was smaller than he'd expected, maybe 5'6", lean and wiry in a way that spoke of hard miles and harder living. She wore dark cargo pants and a long-sleeved shirt, her black hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. But it was her eyes that struck Morrison: dark, intelligent, and carrying a weight that made her look decades older than her 30 years. She held a Glock 19 in a low, ready position, not quite pointed at him, but close enough to matter. "You're not here to arrest me," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Not yet," Morrison replied honestly. "I'm here to understand what really happened on September 7th. Sarah studied him for a long moment, her finger resting outside the trigger guard. Proper discipline, Morrison noted. Finally, she lowered the weapon and set it on the table. "Captain Patterson talked," she said. I figured he would eventually. He's one of the good ones, which is why he's still just a captain while bastards like Hendricks make colonel. Tell me your side, Morrison said, moving carefully to the second chair. I've read the files, heard the official story. Now I want the truth. Sarah sat across from him, and for the first time, Morrison saw the exhaustion in her face. This woman had been running for 3 years, living in the shadows, hunting her demons while the world hunted her. My unit was set up, she began, her voice steady despite the pain Morrison could hear underneath. We received intelligence that a high-value target would be moving through a specific valley. The intel came through official channels, marked as verified from multiple sources. My platoon commander, Captain Rodriguez, trusted it. We all did. She pulled a laptop from a bag beside the table, opening it to show Morrison a series of documents. What we didn't know was that the intelligence had been fabricated. Someone in our command structure fed false information into the system, making it look legitimate. The Taliban were waiting for us. They knew our route, our timing, even our call signs. Morrison leaned forward, studying the documents. They showed intelligence reports, communication logs, timestamps that didn't match. How did you figure this out? I didn't die, Sarah said simply. I was on overwatch, 800 meters out. I watched my brothers walk into that kill zone, and there was nothing I could do except try to cover their retreat. I killed 7 insurgents before they zeroed my position, but it wasn't enough. 12 men died in less than 4 minutes. Her hands clenched into fists, knuckles white. After the shooting stopped, I evacuated with the bodies, and while I was waiting for extraction, I accessed Rodriguez's tablet. He'd given me his credentials in case something happened to him. I found the original intelligence report, and something was wrong. The timestamps had been altered. Source codes didn't match our standard protocols. Someone had inserted false information into our operational planning. And when you reported this? Sarah's laugh was bitter. I was told I was traumatized, that I was looking for someone to blame, that I needed psychological evaluation. When I pushed harder, showed them the evidence, 3 senior officers suddenly took an interest in my case. Hendricks, Vickers, and Blackwood. They buried the evidence, claimed my analysis was flawed, and when I wouldn't back down, they came after me. She pulled out a hard drive from her pocket, holding it up. 3 years, Commander. 3 years of digging, investigating, following money trails and communication patterns. This drive contains everything. Proof that Hendricks was taking payments from a Taliban-connected facilitator, evidence that Vickers falsified intelligence reports, records showing Blackwood helped cover it up. They sold my unit out for money and advancement. Morrison felt rage building in his chest. Why? Why would they do this? Because the war was ending and they needed relevance. They needed wins to put on their service records. So they made a deal with certain Taliban commanders, feed them some sacrificial lambs, and in return, they'd get intelligence on other targets. My unit was the sacrifice. We were expendable. And Khalid Ghazi. Sarah's face hardened. He was the tactical commander who planned the ambush. He knew we were coming because Hendricks told him. After my unit died, Ghazi got a promotion within Taliban command structure. Hendricks got his star and a cushy posting at CENTCOM. Everyone won except the 12 Marines who bled out in that valley. Morrison sat back, processing everything. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Senior officers betraying their own people, trading American lives for career advancement and blood money. Why kill Ghazi now? He asked. Why wait 3 years? Because I needed the evidence first, Sarah said. If I'd killed him earlier, I would have been just another rogue soldier seeking revenge. Now I have proof. I have everything documented, verified, backed up in multiple locations. I've already sent copies to journalists, to congressional oversight committees, to military investigators who aren't compromised. She stood, moving to the window to look out at the waking city. Ghazi's death was the last piece. It proves they're still working together, still covering for each other. His death will trigger investigations. force people to ask questions about why a high-value Taliban commander was never targeted by official operations despite being on every kill list for 3 years. Morrison understood now. Sarah Chen wasn't just a soldier seeking vengeance. She was a whistleblower with a rifle, someone who'd spent 3 years building an airtight case against corruption that went to the highest levels of military command. "What happens now?" Morrison asked. Sarah turned to face him, and Morrison saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen before: hope. "That depends on you, Commander. You can arrest me, turn me in, let the system bury me like they buried my evidence. Or you can help me finish this. Help me make sure my brother's deaths weren't for nothing." Morrison stood, walking to the wall covered in maps and intelligence reports. He saw 3 years of work, of a soldier who'd sacrificed everything for truth and justice. He thought about the 12 Marines who'd died, about the officers who'd betrayed them, about the system that had tried to silence anyone who asked uncomfortable questions. He thought about what kind of man he was, what kind of officer he wanted to be. "Show me everything," Morrison said finally. "If we're going to burn this whole thing down, we're going to do it right." Sarah Chen smiled for the first time since he'd met her. It was a warrior's smile, hard and determined. "Welcome to the war within the war, Commander. It's about to get very ugly." Sarah Chen spread documents across the small table like a dealer laying out cards in a deadly game. Morrison pulled his chair closer, his combat-trained mind shifting into analytical mode. What he saw in the next 2 hours would fundamentally change everything he thought he knew about honor, duty, and the chain of command. "Start here," Sarah said, pulling up a financial document on her laptop. March 2021. Colonel Marcus Hendricks receives a wire transfer of $47,000 to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The money originates from a shell company in Dubai, but I traced it back to a Taliban-connected money laundering operation run through Pakistan. Morrison studied the banking records, the transaction trails, the carefully hidden paper routes designed to obscure the source. "How did you get access to this?" "I had help," Sarah admitted. "Former Marine intelligence analysts who believed me, a few CIA officers who'd seen similar corruption, even an NSA contractor who was sick of watching dirty officers get away with murder. When you're fighting the system, you find allies in unexpected places." She pulled up another file, communication intercepts, encrypted messages that had been painstakingly decoded. "These are conversations between Hendricks and a man named Rashid Ahmadi, a Taliban facilitator. They go back 18 months before September 7th. Hendricks was feeding operational information to Ahmadi, patrol routes, unit strengths, timing of operations. In exchange, Ahmadi would provide intelligence on Taliban positions that Hendricks could claim as wins for his command." "Jesus Christ," Morrison breathed, reading the translations. The messages were damning, clear evidence of collaboration, of American lives being traded for career advancement. "It gets worse," Sarah continued, her voice tight with controlled rage. "Lieutenant Colonel Vickers was running a parallel operation. He was altering intelligence assessments, making certain Taliban commanders appear less dangerous than they actually were, ensuring they wouldn't be targeted by drone strikes or raid operations." Why would he protect Taliban commanders? Because they were his assets. Vickers was running his own intelligence network using enemy combatants as sources. He'd feed them information. They'd give him intel he could package and send up the chain as his own work. It made him look like a genius analyst, but it meant keeping certain Taliban leaders alive and active, even when they were killing American soldiers. Morrison felt sick. He'd spent 20 years serving, believing in the mission, trusting the chain of command. Now he was looking at evidence that senior officers had been actively collaborating with the enemy, trading American lives for promotions and medals. "And Major Blackwood?" he asked. Sarah's expression darkened. She was the cleaner. When questions started being asked after September 7th, when I began pushing for an investigation, Blackwood made everything disappear. Evidence went missing from secure servers. Witness statements were altered. Investigation files were classified so heavily that even congressional oversight couldn't access them. She's got connections in the intelligence community that go deep, probably how she stayed protected all this time. Morrison stood, packing the small room. His mind was racing through implications, consequences, the sheer scope of the betrayal. You said you've already sent this evidence out. To who? Emma Rodriguez, the Guardian journalist. She's got a complete copy and is working on a story. I've also sent packages to 3 different congressional oversight committees, the DOD Inspector General and military justice advocates. Everything's encrypted, time-stamped, backed up in multiple secure locations. They'll come after you with everything they've got, Morrison said. Once this breaks, you'll be public enemy number 1. They'll paint you as a rogue operator, unstable, dangerous. They'll discredit you before anyone takes the evidence seriously. I know, Sarah said quietly. That's why I needed one more thing before I disappear for good. She pulled out a separate hard drive, smaller than the first. This contains communication intercepts from the past 72 hours. Hendricks, Vickers, and Blackwood have been in contact constantly since Ghazi's death. They know something's wrong. They're panicking. Morrison took the drive, examining it. How recent? Last intercept was 3 hours ago. Hendricks is in Tampa, Vickers is at the Pentagon, Blackwood is supposedly in Langley. But they're coordinating, trying to figure out who killed Ghazi and whether their operation has been compromised. She looked directly at Morrison. They don't know about me yet. They think it might be ISI or a rival Taliban faction or even Russian intelligence. But they're scared. Good, Morrison said coldly. They should be. His encrypted phone buzzed. A message from Chief Ramirez. Commander, we have movement. 3 vehicles approaching from the east, military configuration. Unknown if hostile. Morrison's tactical instincts kicked in immediately. We need to move, now. Sarah was already packing, her movements practiced and efficient. She grabbed the laptop, the hard drives, stuffed documents into a waterproof bag. There's a back exit through the building next door. I've got a vehicle staged 2 blocks away. My team can provide cover. No, Sarah cut him off. Commander, if you're seen helping me, they'll destroy you too. You need plausible deniability. You came here to apprehend me, I escaped. That's the story. Morrison grabbed her arm. I'm not letting you run alone, not anymore. For a moment, Sarah's hardened exterior cracked, and Morrison saw the young Marine she'd once been. Idealistic, brave, betrayed by the very system she'd sworn to defend. Why are you doing this? She asked. Why risk everything? Because 12 Marines died for nothing, and the men responsible are still giving orders, still ruining lives, still thinking they're untouchable. Morrison's voice was steel. And because you're right, this is bigger than both of us. It's about whether we're going to be the kind of military that protects criminals or the kind that roots them out, no matter the cost. The sound of vehicles stopping outside echoed through the window, doors slamming, boots on pavement. Sarah moved to the window, peering through the blinds. 4 vehicles, approximately 16 operators. They're setting up a perimeter. She looked at Morrison. This isn't local security. This is a professional team. Morrison's phone buzzed again. This time it was an encrypted message from an unknown number. Stand down, Commander Morrison. Turn over the rogue operator and there will be no consequences for you. Resist and we'll bury you both. B. Blackwood, somehow she'd found them. They've been tracking you, Sarah realized. Your phone, your vehicle, they knew you'd come looking for me. Morrison pulled his sidearm, checking the magazine. Then they're about to learn that I don't take orders from traitors. Sarah grabbed a rifle from behind the sleeping mat, the same custom .338 Lapua Magnum she'd used for the impossible shot. We can't shoot our way out of this. There are too many of them, and we're in a civilian area. We don't have to shoot our way out, Morrison said, a plan forming. We just need to buy time. He keyed his radio. "Chief, I need a favor, and it's going to sound insane." Outside, the tactical team was preparing to breach. Inside, Sarah Chen and Jake Morrison stood back to back, two warriors who'd found themselves on the right side of a very wrong war. "What's the plan?" Sarah asked. Morrison smiled grimly. "We're going to give them exactly what they want, me trying to arrest you. And while they're watching us, we're going to broadcast everything we've got to every media outlet, every congressional office, every military justice advocate we can reach." "That's actually insane," Sarah said. "I know," Morrison looked at her, "but it's the only way to make sure the truth gets out, no matter what happens to us." The sound of boots on the stairs echoed through the building. Time was up. "Staff Sergeant Chen," Morrison said formally, loudly enough for anyone listening to hear, "you're under arrest for unauthorized military operations and—" He never finished the sentence. Sarah moved with lightning speed, disarming him, spinning him around, putting him in a perfect restraint hold. To anyone watching, it looked like she was taking a hostage. But Morrison felt her press something into his hand, a USB drive. "Insurance," she whispered. "Get it out no matter what." Then all hell broke loose. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and smoke. Flashbangs detonated, filling the small apartment with blinding light and deafening noise. Sarah had already moved, dragging Morrison toward the window as the tactical team poured through the doorway, weapons raised, lasers cutting through the smoke. "Federal agents, nobody move." But they weren't federal agents. Morrison recognized the gear, the tactics, the cold efficiency. This was a private military contractor team, sanitized, deniable, the kind of operators used for missions that could never appear on any official record. Blackwood had sent killers, not cops. Sarah kicked out the window, glass exploding outward. "Go," she shouted, shoving Morrison toward the opening even as she raised her rifle toward the breach team. She wasn't aiming to kill. Morrison saw her target the door frame, the walls suppressing fire designed to make them take cover rather than drop bodies. Morrison didn't hesitate. He dove through the window, catching the fire escape railing, his body slamming against the metal hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. Below, his team was returning fire, not at the contractors but creating chaos, laying down covering fire at nothing and everything, giving Sarah an opening. She came through the window like a ghost, rolling across the fire escape, her rifle still up. "Your team is good," she gasped. "They're the best," Morrison replied, pulling the USB drive from his pocket. "And we're about to find out if they're loyal enough to commit career suicide with me." They descended the fire escape as bullets sparked off metal railings. Morrison keyed his radio. "Chief, I need full transmission, all frequencies, civilian and military. Broadcast the contents of this drive to every news agency, every government oversight office, every military justice channel you can access. Do it now." "Sir, that's—" "An order. Do it, Chief. Everything we've got." Below them, Ramirez was already moving. He'd anticipated this. Good operators always had contingencies. He pulled a ruggedized laptop from his pack, connecting to a satellite uplink they'd brought for emergency communications. Morrison tossed the USB drive, and Ramirez caught it one-handed. "Uploading now," Ramirez confirmed. "Commander, you know this ends all of us, right?" "Better to end with honor than live as accessories to murder," Morrison shot back. The contractor team had regrouped, moving to pursue. But they were hesitating. Too many civilians on the street now, merchants and early morning shoppers scattering at the sound of gunfire. Even sanitized operators couldn't massacre an entire neighborhood without consequences. Sarah and Morrison hit the ground running. The vehicle she'd mentioned, a beat-up Toyota sedan that looked like every other car in Jalalabad, was exactly where she'd said. They dove inside, Sarah taking the wheel, engine roaring to life. 3 blocks, then turn left, Morrison directed, watching their 6 My team will provide mobile cover. The chase through Jalalabad's morning streets was controlled chaos. Sarah drove with the skill of someone who'd spent years navigating hostile territory, fast but not reckless, aggressive but not stupid. Behind them, two contractor vehicles pursued while Morrison's team ran interference, their armored SUV blocking intersections, forcing the pursuers to take longer routes. Morrison's phone exploded with incoming calls. He ignored them all except one, a number he recognized from the Pentagon. "Morrison, stand down immediately." Lieutenant Colonel Vickers' voice was ice and fury. "You're aiding a fugitive, transmitting classified information. You've just ended your career and guaranteed yourself a court-martial." "Good," Morrison replied calmly. "I'll have plenty of time to testify about how you sold out 12 Marines for career advancement. The evidence is already out there, Vickers. It's over." "You don't know what you're doing. There are national security implications." "The only national security threat I see is corrupt officers who betray their own people." Morrison's voice was steel. "September 7th, 2022. 12 Marines. You remember them, Vickers, or were they just numbers in your performance report?" He hung up and immediately received another call, this time from an unknown number. He answered on speaker. "Commander Morrison." It was a woman's voice, cold and controlled. "Major Sarah Blackwood, you're making a mistake that will haunt you for the rest of your life. That woman is unstable, dangerous, feeding you lies to justify her crimes. Stand down, turn her over, and we can make this go away." Sarah laughed bitterly, still navigating through traffic at high speed. "Tell her I say hello, Major. Tell her the classified files from Operation Sandstorm are also being released, the ones showing how she helped funnel intelligence to enemy combatants, how she buried evidence of systematic corruption." Blackwood's voice sharpened. "Chen, I should have known you were too damaged to just disappear quietly. You're going to get people killed with these reckless accusations." "People are already dead," Sarah shouted. 12 of my brothers are dead because you and your friends decided their lives were worth less than your careers. I'm not the one who's going to get people killed. I'm the one making sure everyone knows who the real killers are." Morrison watched his phone as notifications began flooding in. The uploads were working. News organizations were picking up the story. Congressional offices were responding. The information was spreading like wildfire across secure and public networks. "It's working," he told Sarah. "The evidence is out there. Even if they catch us now, they can't bury it." But Sarah's expression was grim. "They're not trying to bury it anymore, Commander. They're trying to bury us." Morrison looked back and saw what she meant. The contractor vehicles had been joined by others, at least 6 now, forming a coordinated pursuit formation. This wasn't about arrest anymore. This was about silencing witnesses before the story got any bigger. His phone rang again. This time it was Emma Rodriguez, the Guardian journalist. "Commander Morrison, I just received your data transmission. This is the biggest military corruption story in decades. But you need to know, there's already a counter-narrative being pushed. Sources at the Pentagon are calling Chen a delusional rogue operator, claiming the evidence is fabricated, saying you've been compromised." "Can you verify the evidence independently?" Morrison asked. "We're working on it, but it'll take time. Financial records, communications intercepts, witness statements. We need to confirm everything before we publish. That's how journalism works." "How much time?" 72 hours minimum." Morrison looked at Sarah, then at the pursuing vehicles. "We don't have 72 hours. We might not have 72 minutes." Sarah took a hard turn, tires screaming. They were heading out of the city now, into the mountainous terrain beyond. "There's one more play," she said. "One person who can verify everything immediately. Someone with enough credibility that even Hendricks and his crew can't discredit him." "Who?" "General Marcus Webb. He was the investigating officer after September 7th, before Blackwood shut him down. He knows the truth. He just couldn't prove it. But if we can get to him, if we can get him to go on record with what he knows combined with our evidence. Morrison understood. Webb was a four-star general, highly decorated, respected across party lines. His testimony would be unimpeachable. Where is he? Bagram Airfield. He's visiting for an inspection tour. But Commander, getting into Bagram while being hunted by a kill team is impossible, Morrison finished. Just like a 3,247-meter kill shot was impossible. Sarah smiled despite everything. You're starting to think like me. That's either very good or very bad. Behind them, the contractor vehicles were closing. Morrison's team was still running interference, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. This was going to come down to seconds and luck. Morrison pulled his sidearm, checking the magazine one more time. Sarah, I need you to know, whatever happens in the next few hours, what you did matters. 12 Marines matter. The truth matters. Don't get sentimental on me now, Commander, Sarah replied, but her voice caught slightly. We're not dead yet, and I didn't survive 3 years in hell just to die before seeing Hendricks in handcuffs. They raced toward Bagram, toward General Webb, toward either vindication or death. Behind them, the kill team pursued. Above them, Morrison's uploaded evidence was spreading across networks, impossible to stop, impossible to bury. The war within the war had gone public. And Commander Jake Morrison had just made the most important shot of his life, not with a rifle, but with the truth. Now they just had to survive long enough to see it hit its target. Bagram Airfield appeared on the horizon like a fortress, its perimeter walls and guard towers stark against the Afghan mountains. Morrison's vehicle was running on fumes and hope, 3 contractor SUVs still in pursuit. His team had peeled off one by one to slow the hunters, buying precious minutes with their careers and possibly their lives. We're not going to make it through the gate, Sarah said, scanning the approaching checkpoint. They'll have alerts out. The moment we identify ourselves, we're done. Morrison was already on his encrypted phone, calling in the only favor he had left. General Webb, this is Commander Jake Morrison, SEAL Team 6. I'm 3 minutes from Bagram's North Gate with evidence of systematic corruption involving senior officers. We're being pursued by a contractor kill team, and I need immediate sanctuary. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Get to the gate, Commander, Webb's gravelly voice finally responded. I'll have security meet you. And Morrison, this better be worth ending both our careers. It's worth 12 Marine lives, sir. That's all the currency I've got left. The contractor vehicles accelerated, realizing their window was closing. Bullets sparked off Morrison's rear bumper as Sarah pushed the struggling Toyota to its limits. The North Gate was 500 meters away, then 300 then. The gate opened. A security detail in full battle rattle emerged, weapons raised, creating a defensive perimeter. Sarah drove straight through, tires screaming as she braked hard inside the base. The contractor vehicles skidded to a stop outside the gate, unable to pursue onto a sovereign U.S. military installation without triggering an international incident. They'd made it. Morrison and Sarah stumbled out of the vehicle, exhausted, battered, but alive. General Marcus Webb stood waiting, 60 years old, built like a tank, 3 rows of ribbons on his chest that told the story of 4 decades of service. His face was carved granite, but his eyes held something Morrison hadn't expected: relief. Staff Sergeant Chen, Webb said quietly, I wondered if you were still alive. Sarah straightened despite her exhaustion coming to attention. Sir, I have evidence. I know what you have, Webb interrupted. It's already hit the news cycle. CNN, The Guardian, Washington Post, they're all running preliminary stories about systematic corruption, officer misconduct, the September 7th massacre. Social media is exploding. Congressional oversight committees are demanding hearings. He looked at Morrison. You two just kicked over the biggest hornet's nest the Pentagon has seen in 20 years. Morrison pulled out the hard drive Sarah had given him. Sir, this contains verified financial records, communication intercepts, witness statements, everything needed to prove that Colonel Hendricks, Lieutenant Colonel Vickers, and Major Blackwood conspired with Taliban forces, resulting in the deaths of 12 Marines. They tried to bury it. They tried to destroy Staff Sergeant Chen, and they just sent a kill team after both of us to silence the truth. Webb took the drive, his jaw clenched. I knew. After September 7th, I knew something was wrong. The intelligence failures were too convenient, the timing too perfect. But every time I pushed for a real investigation, I was shut down. Files disappeared. Witnesses recanted. I was told to drop it or face forced retirement. Why didn't you fight harder? Sarah's voice was raw with 3 years of pain. Webb met her eyes. Because I was a coward. Because I chose my career over the truth. Because 12 Marines died and I let their killers walk free rather than risk my own stars. His voice cracked. I've lived with that shame every day since. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Staff Sergeant. I'm asking for the chance to finally do the right thing. Within the hour, General Webb convened an emergency video conference with the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the heads of military justice. Morrison and Sarah sat in a secure briefing room, watching as their evidence was presented, verified, cross-referenced. The financial trails were undeniable. The communications intercepts were authenticated. The pattern of corruption was impossible to ignore. Morrison's phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking. 3 senior military officers placed on administrative leave pending investigation into alleged corruption and conspiracy. Another alert. Pentagon announces formation of Special Investigative Task Force following leaked evidence of military corruption. And another. Congressional leaders demand full inquiry into September 7, 2022 Marine Unit massacre. The truth was out. It couldn't be buried anymore. 3 weeks later, Morrison stood before a military tribunal, facing charges of insubordination, unauthorized release of classified information, and aiding a fugitive. He accepted full responsibility, refused legal counsel that might have mitigated the charges, and stood silent as they read his sentence. Dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all pay and benefits, possible prison time pending further review. But as he walked out of the courtroom, he saw something that made it all worthwhile. On the steps of the Military Justice Building, 12 Marines in dress blues stood at attention, the families of the men who died on September 7th. They saluted him as he passed. 6 months later, Morrison sat in a small apartment in Virginia, watching the news. The screen showed Colonel Hendricks, Lieutenant Colonel Vickers, and Major Blackwood in handcuffs, being led into federal court to face charges of conspiracy, treason, and murder. General Webb testified against them. His 4-star rank not enough to save him from forced retirement, but enough to lend unimpeachable credibility to the prosecution. The court-martial proceedings revealed everything: the payments, the intelligence sharing, the deliberate sacrifice of American lives for career advancement. The trial lasted 3 months. All 3 officers were convicted. Hendricks received life imprisonment. Vickers got 35 years. Blackwood, who cooperated and provided additional evidence of corruption throughout the intelligence community, received 20 years. Morrison's discharge was quietly reversed to honorable. He received no apology, no ceremony, just a letter from the Secretary of Defense acknowledging mitigating circumstances and restoring his benefits. He burned the letter the day it arrived. 1 year after the shot heard across the valley, Morrison received a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, 12 Marines in combat gear, smiling, alive, taken days before September 7th. On the back, written in careful script, "They're finally at peace. So am I. Thank you for taking the shot that mattered. SC." Morrison never saw Sarah Chen again. Intelligence reports suggested she disappeared into civilian life somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, living under a new identity, finally free from the ghosts that had haunted her. The Marine Corps quietly reinstated her honorable service record and awarded her the Navy Cross for actions on September 7th, recognizing that she'd killed 7 insurgents while trying desperately to save her unit. Morrison kept the photograph on his desk. Some nights, when the weight of what they'd done pressed down, he'd look at those 12 faces and remember why it mattered. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because some truths are worth any cost to expose. He'd taken a different kind of shot that day in Jalalabad, not with a rifle, but with his career, his reputation, his entire future. And just like Sarah's impossible 3,247-meter shot that had started everything, his aim had been true. The corrupt officers were in prison. The truth was public. 12 Marines who'd been betrayed by their own command finally had justice. And Commander Jake Morrison, now just Jake Morrison, civilian, slept soundly for the first time in a year. Some shots echo across valleys. Others echo across lifetimes. Both are worth taking. The end.